What if I told you that some of the world's most feared football players never actually started playing football? That they were trained in secret facilities using methods so extreme they would be banned in most countries? Welcome to the most bizarre and fascinating story in women's football history. A story about a country that turned gymnasts into football legends. Through military-style training that sounds more like a spy movie than sports preparation. This is the untold story of North Korean women's football, a program so secretive, so intense, and so successful that it produced players who dominated Asia for decades. But here's the twist. Most of these football players had never touched a soccer ball until they were teenagers. Pause for a dramatic effect if you think you know everything about elite sports training. Prepare to have your mind completely blown. Because what you're about to hear will change how you think about athletic development forever. The mystery begins 45 seconds to 4 minutes. Mysterious building tension music. Let's start with a riddle. How does a country with a population smaller than Texas consistently produce football players who can outrun, outjump, and outlast opponents from much larger nations? How does North Korea, a nation known more for politics than sports, manage to qualify for multiple World Cups and dominate Asian competitions? The answer lies in a training program so unique and controversial that it's been shrouded in secrecy. For over 40 years, picture this, it's 1985 in Pyongyang. A group of 8-year-old girls are selected not for their football skills, but for their flexibility, balance, and mental toughness. They're taken to a remote training facility where they'll spend the next decade in what can only be described as athletic boot camp. These girls won't see their families for months at a time. They'll wake up at 4 a.m. every day. They'll train for 12 hours daily. And here's the kicker. They won't even touch a football for the first 3 years. Instead, they'll become gymnasts. Elite-level gymnasts, but not for Olympic glory. This gymnastics training is just phase one of the most unconventional football development program ever created. The mastermind behind this revolutionary approach? A man named Kim Jong-un, North Korea's legendary national team coach, who believed that the foundation of great football wasn't ball skills. It was superhuman physical conditioning and unbreakable mental discipline. His philosophy was simple but radical. Build perfect athletes first. Teach them football later. The selection process, 4 to 7 minutes. Tense, militaristic background music. The selection process for North Korea's football program reads like something out of a dystopian novel. But it's completely real. Every year, scouts would travel across North Korea looking for girls aged 6 to 10, but they weren't looking for kids who could kick a ball well. They were looking for something much more specific. First criterion, perfect physical proportions. Height, weight, limb length, everything had to fit precise. Mathematical ratios that the coaches believed would produce optimal athletic performance. Second, exceptional flexibility. Every candidate had to perform gymnastics routines that would challenge trained athletes. If you couldn't do a perfect backflip by age 8, you were out. Third, mental resilience. This was the most brutal part. Candidates were subjected to psychological tests designed to break them. They were shouted at, isolated, pushed beyond their limits. Only those who never cried, never complained, never showed weakness would advance. But here's the most shocking part. Parents had no choice in the matter. If your daughter was selected, she was gone. For the next 10 to 15 years, she would belong to the state football program. One former player, who later defected and spoke anonymously, described the selection day. I was 7 years old, playing in my village. Men in uniforms came and asked me to do some exercises. I thought it was a game. I had no idea I was being tested for something that would consume my entire childhood. My mother cried when they took me away. I didn't understand why at the time. Once selected, these girls were transported to the Moranbong Training Center in Pyongyang, a facility so secretive that it doesn't appear on any public maps. What happened inside those walls was unlike anything the sporting world had ever seen. For the first 3 years of their football training, these girls never saw a soccer ball. Instead, they lived and breathed gymnastics with an intensity that would make Olympic programs look casual. A typical day started at 4 a.m. with a cold shower, regardless of weather. No exceptions. This wasn't about hygiene. It was about mental conditioning. Learning to function when your body screams no, 4:30 a.m. to 7 a.m. 3.5 hours of flexibility training. But this wasn't your typical stretching routine. We're talking about contortionist level flexibility exercises that would leave most people in tears. Former player Kim Sun-hui, who defected in 2009, described it like this. They would stretch us until we passed out from pain. Then they would wake us up and continue. They said pain was just weakness leaving the body. 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. breakfast. But even meals were training. They had exactly 15 minutes to eat in complete silence, sitting in perfect posture. Food was measured. To the gram, just enough nutrition to fuel training. Never enough to feel satisfied. 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Core gymnastics training. Balance beam work, floor routines, vault training. But with a twist, they trained with weighted vests, ankle weights. Sometimes even while carrying heavy packs. The goal wasn't to create Olympic gymnasts. The goal was to build bodies that could defy physics on a football field. Think about it. A footballer who has perfect balance, can change direction midair, has the flexibility to reach impossible balls, and the core strength to stay upright. Under any physical challenge, 12 p.m. to 2 p.m., tactical education. Here's where it gets really interesting. While their bodies were being forged through gymnastics, their minds were being programmed with football strategy. They would watch thousands of hours of game footage, memorizing plays, studying formations, learning to think like tactical masterminds. 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., advanced gymnastics with military-style obstacles. Picture gymnastic routines performed while navigating army assault courses. Backflips over walls, somersaults under barbed wire, handstands while crossing rivers. 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Mental conditioning. This might be the most disturbing part. The girls were subjected to psychological training designed to eliminate fear, pain sensitivity, and individual desires. They were taught that their only purpose was to bring glory to North Korea through football victory. 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., recovery and meditation. Even rest was structured. They would lie in perfect formation, visualizing perfect football performances while their bodies recovered from the day's abuse. One former trainer, who later fled North Korea, revealed, "We were creating football soldiers, not football players." By the end of 3 years, these girls could do things with their bodies that seemed impossible. But more importantly, their minds were unbreakable. The results of this gymnastics foundation were immediately obvious when these girls finally touched their first football. Year 4 was when the magic happened. After 3 years of gymnastics hell, these teenage girls were finally introduced to the sport they would dominate. But this wasn't like learning football in any normal program. These girls brought gymnastic abilities to the football field that had never been seen before. Imagine a player who could do a backflip throw-in that would land the ball exactly where she wanted it, 40 yards away. Picture a goalkeeper who could literally bounce off the goalposts to make saves that seemed to defy gravity. Think about defenders who could slide tackle. Then immediately spring back to their feet with a kippa, ready to continue play before their opponents had even realized what happened. The football training itself was equally intense. They would train with balls that were 20% heavier than regulation footballs. When they played with normal balls in actual matches, everything felt effortless. They practiced shooting at goals that were 20% smaller than regulation size. In real games, the goals looked massive to them. They trained on fields that were deliberately made uneven, with obstacles and hazards. Real football fields felt like luxury playing surfaces by comparison, but perhaps most importantly, they trained with constant physical contact that would be considered assault in most football programs. Players were expected to continue performing perfect technique while being pushed, shoved, and physically challenged beyond anything they would face in actual competition. The psychological training continued as well. They were taught to show no emotion regardless of what happened on the field. No celebration after scoring, no frustration after mistakes, no fear when facing larger opponents. By age 16, these gymnast footballers were ready for their first real competition. And the results were shocking. In 1989, North Korea's women's team, composed entirely of gymnast-trained players, won their first Asian Cup. They didn't just win. They dominated. They outran every opponent, outjumped everyone in aerial battles, and displayed a level of technical precision that left coaches around the world speechless. But the most remarkable thing wasn't their physical abilities, it was their mental toughness. They never seemed tired, never showed frustration, and never gave up regardless of the score or situation. Other teams started calling them the machines because they played with such robotic precision and endless endurance. World Cup breakthrough. 17 to 22 minutes. Epic, triumphant music building. 1999. The FIFA Women's World Cup in the United States. North Korea qualified for their first ever World Cup. And nobody knew what to expect from this mysterious team. What the world witnessed over the next month would revolutionize how people thought about athletic training in female football. And their opening match against Nigeria, North Korea's players did things that had never been seen in women's football. Their goalkeeper, Cho Sun-hoo, made a save by literally running up the goalpost and catching a ball that was headed for the top corner. It was like watching Spider-Man in football boots. Their striker, Ri Young-ok, scored a goal that is still talked about today. She received a cross, did a mid-air somersault to avoid two defenders, and volleyed the ball into the net while upside down. The replay was shown on sports highlights for years, but it wasn't just individual brilliance. Their team coordination was unlike anything seen before. They moved like a single organism, perfectly synchronized, never making positional mistakes. American. Sports commentators were baffled. One famously said during the broadcast, "I don't know what North Korea feeds these players, but they don't move like normal human beings." They made it to the quarterfinals, losing eventually to the United States, in a match that went to extra time. But they had announced themselves as a force in women's football. More importantly, they had revealed their secret weapon, gymnast-trained athletes who brought circus-like abilities to the football field. After the World Cup, football federations around the world started investigating North Korea's training methods. What they discovered shocked the sporting establishment. These players weren't just fit. They were superhuman in their athletic capabilities. Medical examinations revealed that they had bone density 40% higher than average athletes' flexibility. Scores that matched Olympic gymnasts' cardiovascular fitness that exceeded marathon runners. Pain tolerance levels that were off the charts. Balance and proprioception abilities that had never been recorded in football players, but perhaps most remarkably, psychological evaluations showed that they had virtually no fear response and an ability to maintain peak performance under extreme pressure that psychologists couldn't explain. The secret was out. North Korea had created football cyborgs through gymnastics training. What followed was a period of Asian football dominance that lasted nearly 2 decades. Between 1999 and 2018, North Korea won the AFC Asian Cup 3 times, finished second 4 times, and never placed lower than 4th. In a continent where Japan and China were considered the superpowers, North Korea consistently outperformed nations with 50 times their resources. But their dominance wasn't just in results. It was in the way they played. North Korean players became legendary for abilities that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. Take Kim Song-hui, who played from 2001 to 2015. She was known for her impossible saves, goalkeeper techniques that involved gymnastics moves that had never been seen in football. She once made a save by doing a handstand on the goal line and kicking the ball away with her feet. Are considered really young. A midfielder who could throw the ball from one penalty area to the other using a gymnastics-inspired throwing technique. Her throw-ins were so accurate and powerful that opposing teams would treat them like corner kicks. The most famous was probably John Myung-hwa, a striker who scored 127 international goals using techniques that borrowed heavily from gymnastics. She would regularly score by doing backflip kicks, aerial cartwheels, and acrobatic volleys that left goalkeepers helpless. International coaches started trying to copy North Korean training methods. But they quickly discovered that the gymnastics foundation couldn't be replicated without the extreme mental conditioning that came with it. Brazilian coach Carlos Alberto Pereira, who observed North Korean training in 2003, said, "They're not training football players. They're creating football artists who happen to have the mental discipline of soldiers." It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The players themselves rarely spoke to international media. But when they did, their responses revealed the depth of their programming. Asked about their unusual training methods, striker Park Sung-ko once said, "We don't think about our training as unusual. We think about other players' training as insufficient." By 2010, North Korea had not only established themselves as an Asian powerhouse, but had begun influencing how other nations approached athletic development. Several countries started incorporating gymnastics elements into their youth football programs, though none could replicate the intensity or results of the North Korean model. The price of perfection, 26 to 28 minutes. Somber, reflective music. But this incredible success came with a human cost that the world is only beginning to understand. Several former North Korean players who have defected over the years have spoken about the darker side of their superhuman training. Physical injuries were considered weakness and were hidden from coaches. Players competed with broken bones, torn ligaments, and concussions because showing pain meant potential expulsion from the program. The psychological conditioning that made them fearless on the football field also made it nearly impossible for them to form normal human relationships or experience normal emotions. Many players never saw their families for years at a time. Some didn't recognize their own parents when they were briefly reunited. Former player Kim Min-young, who defected in 2017, revealed, "We were taught that feeling homesickness, sadness, or individual desires were betrayals of the state. By the time I was 20, I couldn't remember how to cry or laugh naturally." The Gymnasts to football training program also had a devastating dropout rate. For every player who made it to the national team, dozens were discarded when they couldn't handle the physical or psychological demands. What happened to these failed candidates remains largely unknown. Despite these human costs, the program continued to produce results that amazed the sporting world. The question wasn't whether the methods worked. Clearly they did. The question was whether the price was worth paying. Today, North Korea remains one of the most feared opponents in Asian women's football. Though their global dominance has somewhat declined as other nations have improved their training methods, the Gymnasts to football program continues. Though recent reports suggest it has been modified to be less extreme following international pressure and some internal reforms. Several former North Korean players now coach in other countries, bringing modified versions of their training methods to new programs. The influence can be seen in youth academies across Asia, where flexibility, balance, and mental toughness are emphasized alongside traditional football skills. But perhaps the most important legacy of North Korea's gymnast footballers is the question they raised about the limits of human athletic potential. They proved that with extreme dedication, unconventional methods, and unwavering commitment, athletes can achieve things that seem impossible. They showed that the boundaries between different sports are more fluid than anyone imagined. They demonstrated that mental conditioning might be even more important than physical training in creating elite athletes. However, they also forced the sporting world to confront uncomfortable questions about how far we should go in pursuit of athletic excellence. At what point does training become abuse? How much sacrifice is too much for sporting glory? These are questions that every serious sports program still grapples with today. What we can say definitively is that North Korea's gymnast footballers changed women's football forever. They expanded our understanding of what was possible on a football field and created a template for athletic development that continues to influence coaches worldwide. Whether you view their story as an inspiration or a cautionary tale, probably says as much about your own values as it does about their methods. But one thing is undeniable. They proved that with the right combination of physical preparation, mental conditioning, and unwavering commitment, human beings can achieve things that seem to transcend normal limitations. The question isn't whether their methods worked. The results speak for themselves. The question is what we're willing to sacrifice to achieve greatness. And that's a question every athlete, coach, and sports fan needs to answer for themselves. Next week, we'll explore another incredible story from Asian women's football, the rise and fall of China's football dynasty, and why they went from world champions to struggling to qualify for tournaments. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, subscribe and let me know in the comments. How far should we go in pursuit of athletic perfection? See you next time on Untold Pitch.